Can child criminals be rehabilitated? And if so, why are we giving them life sentences? If we're going to give children life sentences, shouldn't we also do away with the age of consent? Eliminate, go back to the way it was in the United Kingdom when Charles Dickens was writing. The age of consent was 10 years old. Eliminate laws against child labor? Just fully step back into the 17th century? Or if we believe that people are redeemable, particularly children, is it now time for us to really and truly reform our criminal justice system, particularly that part of it that deals with children? This is the issue that is going to be before the Supreme Court right now. Juvenile offenders, on Monday of this week, they heard arguments in which a 13-year-old boy was sentenced to life for rape, and another teenage boy was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree homicide, or second-degree murder, which is not, I guess, homicide is first-degree murder. And his lawyers, Mr. Sullivan, who was a 13, his lawyers are arguing that this sentence imposes, quote, a terminal, unchangeable, once-and-for-all judgment upon the whole life of a human being, and declares that human being forever unfit to be part of civil society. That 13-year-old children are unfinished products, human works in progress. With us is Dudley Sharp. He is the founder of Justice Matters, a capital punishment proponent. Homicide Survivors. Is it .org or .com, Dudley? Oh, he's on the phone. I'm sorry. Let me push the right button here and get Dudley on. Hey, Dudley.
How are you?
I'm well. It's homicide survivors. What?
.com.
.com. Thank you. How could anybody justify a 13-year-old getting life in prison?
Well, you need to ask the jurors that do it all the time. The justification for it is, number one, I will probably agree with you that it's a horrible result. Secondly, I will say that in some circumstances that horrible result is the best result that we can have for one reason. Number one, the jury has deemed it appropriate regardless of how young that particular defendant was. And number two, if we let them out, it represents a greater risk to more people than it does a risk of society by keeping that individual in prison.
Isn't there don't we have both a moral and I suppose some would argue a religious, but let's set that aside for the moment, just frame it as moral, obligation to try to have a criminal justice system that is also restorative as well as punitive? My understanding is, and I may be wrong, but this is what this ABC News story says. In fact, a quote from ABC News: "The United States is the only country in the world that allows such a punishment, life imprisonment for a child." Isn't there something to be said for having a system that tries to redeem people, particularly children?
I think there's a lot to be said for that, but I think the reality is, and this is why we have these types of sentences, there's three things that can happen with a violent offender morally, and that is they can stay the same, which is a very bad result. They can get worse, which is a much worse result, right, or they can possibly get better. And what that means is they could still be really bad, or they could be a saint.
Sure.
Two out of those three are bad, and we know from our parole and probation system that we make huge mistakes all of the time in our assessment of the rehabilitation of these people. So there's two bad results. The bad result is that you keep someone in prison for a lifetime that in fact was a rehabilitated person and could have wonderfully contributed to society, or you release them early and they harm innocence.
But the point that I'm making, Dudley, is that our prison system is not a rehabilitative system. That our system, we have in the United States, we have more people in prison, both in absolute numbers and on a per capita basis, than any other country in the world. More people in prison than the communist dictatorship of the People's Republic of China that has more than 1 billion people. Our system is not rehabilitating people. It doesn't even seem designed for it. In fact, we're moving in the other direction. We're privatizing prisons. We're turning it into a for-profit industry. We now have companies that are lobbying for 3 strikes and you're out laws literally for shoplifters. And because they can make more money warehousing people, and we haven't had a serious conversation in this country, to the best of my recollection, in at least 30 years about rehabilitation in our criminal justice system.
Actually, that discussion has never gone away. The problem was in the 60s and early 70s, where rehabilitation was the major theme. What happened was we ended up with a turnstile criminal justice system where a lot of these offenders were released and they reoffended at extraordinary.
Right, we didn't do it right. But why is it
why
is it that countries like Sweden or Norway, they actually can rehabilitate people, we don't?
I think that we do have a number of prisons, as you can find on the internet, that have different systems and do a much better job at rehabilitation and have much lower recidivism rates than others in the country. But that doesn't do away with the argument as to how many times we make errors in releasing people and that they may harm again.
So you're saying because we sometimes make a mistake and we let somebody out who then goes on to reoffend. I mean, Willie Horton is the obvious poster boy for this. That although he wasn't actually released, I mean, that was actually, we probably shouldn't even pollute the conversation with that because
I didn't do it.
Yeah, I know. It was my fault. I'm walking back from my own comment. But because it sounds to me like what you're saying is that because occasionally we make a mistake, and that mistake, it can be a deadly mistake to an innocent person, because we occasionally make a mistake, that we shouldn't, that justifies our having life in prison and frankly, in your opinion, even the death sentence for children. And it seems to me that for a 13-year-old, that their brains are not fully developed, particularly the parts of the brain that involve inhibition of impulsive behavior, not even close to fully developed at the age of 13.
Yeah, but the reality is that the overwhelming percentage of 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17-year-olds, 99% of them, don't commit violent crimes. And what I'm saying is, I'm not talking.
But the ones who do are put in our adult prisons.
I'm not talking about a few who reoffend and a few that we make mistakes with. There are thousands upon thousands of people murdered or seriously injured every year because of the errors in releasing these people early. It's an incredible catastrophe. I mean, I'm surprised we don't have innocent projects all over the United States who are out there trying to protect innocent people from known violent offenders that we have released.
We do. That's called the police department.
Well, actually, they're not doing a very good job of it, and what I'm telling you is that the mistakes are huge and the numbers are extremely high where we make these types of errors. And
then let's fix the system.
What?
Then let's reform our system.
Well,
rather than throwing away more human beings, particularly children.
Well, it takes a while to reform, and in the meantime, you don't release unless you want more innocent people to be harmed.
Well, we can't walk and chew gum? We can't do both?
You can do both at the same time, but you can't start releasing them before you improve the reformation part of the system.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't want to release somebody into society unless there's some real confident demonstration that they really and truly are reformed.
And you won't have that until after they're reformed, regardless of the system that you have.
But that's not an argument for not having reform, aggressively working for reform in the system, rather than aggressively working for life in prison or the death penalty for kids.
I don't at all disagree with you.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Dudley Sharp, homicidesurvivors.com, his website. Dudley, thanks for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking with you. Interesting. 866-987-THOM, our telephone number. Life without parole, cruel and unusual. Is it cruel and unusual punishment for a 13-year-old? I think so.